The Star Wars saga now spans 3 trilogies, several side movies, a handful of TV shows, and dozens, if not hundreds, of novels and books. That's not to mention all the comic books and video games that have added their own depth to the universe. We've had every kind of tale in Star Wars by this point: the comedy, the romance, the action-adventure, even a zombie story. Yes, you heard that right. But if there's one theme that exists throughout all, it's tragedy. Betrayals, heartbreak, death, and destruction are just common occurrences when you're dealing with powerful space wizards duking it out in a struggle of good versus evil. Needless to say, Star Wars has been filled with traumatic events. Time and again, we've seen our characters go through ordeals or witness things that would turn anyone into a quivering wreck. And as an audience, we've been left with our own scars. Due to the extensive nature of the Star Wars universe, we've narrowed this down just to events that have happened in the movies. Be warned, you're about to be triggered. I'm Cy for WhatCulture.com, and these are the 10 most traumatic events in Star Wars. Number 10. The death of Aunt Beru and Uncle Owen. Many of the most tragic events in Star Wars were catalysts for significant events happening further down the line. The murder of Luke's Guardians led to his decision to leave Tatooine, the destruction of the Death Star, and the eventual overthrow of the Empire. It's true that Luke wanted to join the Rebel Alliance before his family's death, but the event triggered an early departure, leading him into the path of Han and Chewie. Meeting the smuggling duo in Mos Eisley was so integral to the story that half the events to follow wouldn't have happened otherwise. For one, Leia wouldn't have been saved, leaving the rebellion without its greatest leader. The death of Luke's Aunt Beru and Uncle Owen was certainly traumatic for the character, but it kind of got glossed over. Luke looks sad for a moment, but then John Williams comes in with his stirring heroes theme, reminding the audience that everything would work out. What's more, Luke never grieves for his aunt and uncle, or even mentions them ever again. This guy had a weird way of processing trauma. Number 9. ROMBA trying to wake NANTA. Star Wars and irritating alien species go together like scum and villainy. In the prequels, fans had to sit through the ordeal that was Jar Jar Binks, but long before Porgs were even a blip on Disney's cash-grabbing radar, Ewoks were introduced into the Star Wars universe. They were essentially child-sized teddy bears who liked playing Tarzan and had a thing for cooking and eating humans alive. Yep, don't forget originally they were going to eat Luke and company. No matter how you felt about them, the Ewoks played an important role in the final installment of the original trilogy. Untold numbers of them died fighting alongside the rebels during the Battle of Endor. It was the death of one in particular that really hit home though. When 2 Ewok warriors are sent flying from a blaster impact, one desperately tries to wake the other, only to realise his companion is dead. What makes things worse is that the Rebel Alliance totally manipulated these guys into going to war for them. The only reason the Ewoks got on side is because they thought C-3PO was a god. When you realise these guys only died in the name of religious fanaticism, it becomes a little more troubling. Number 8. The destruction of Alderaan. The Empire did some pretty reprehensible shit, but committing planetary genocide was top of the list. Not only did they kill every last sentient being living on Alderaan, but they completely incinerated all the fauna and flora, leaving nothing but hunks of rock floating through space. Being environmentally conscious wasn't on the Empire's agenda for 1 second. Roughly 2 billion people died in the explosion, including Leia's adoptive parents. The instant deaths of so many caused such a disturbance that Force-sensitive beings like Obi-Wan were physically shaken. Moff Tarkin, the foul, stinking commander of the Death Star, gave the order. He believed ruling through fear was the only way to dominate a populace. If you could inflict mass trauma to such degree that people were cowered into submission, then you were one step closer to ruling the galaxy. He ordered all the Imperial personnel aboard the Death Star to watch the destruction of Alderaan to remind them of the Empire's power. This had the effect of dissuading those who had been thinking of joining the rebellion from doing so. Number 7. The loss of Rogue One. Rogue One was the darkest Star Wars movie we've ever seen. Sure, there was the wisecracking ex-Imperial droid K2SO, but the overall tone was pretty sinister. It was the first time the Rebel Alliance and its offshoots weren't painted merely as heroic freedom fighters. It was implied that Saw Gerrera's partisans weren't above committing terrorist-like activities to achieve their ends. Even Cassian Andor, the Alliance spy, had done some fairly nefarious stuff in his fight against Palpatine's regime. We saw him kill the Alliance informant Tivik when he feared he might be captured by the stormtroopers. Yep, it's a much darker and much more nuanced side of Star Wars. Despite seeing the protagonists get up to some questionable behaviour, we still sympathised with their struggle. Their fight against the Empire was justified, and the fact they were willing to commit the ultimate sacrifice for their cause made them tragic heroes. As Rogue One battled to retrieve the Death Star plans, it was clear they'd taken on a mission they would never return from. One by one, we saw them go down in a blaze of glory, until the last moment when Jyn Erso and Cassian Andor were engulfed in a fiery blast from the Death Star. Number 6. The death of SHMI Skywalker. How old you were when the prequels came out will have affected your Star Wars experience. For some, these movies might have been their first introduction to the Skywalker saga. If that was the case, then the fall of Anakin to the dark side would have played out like an unexpected tragedy. For those that already knew the fate of Anakin, they watched these movies with a bitter helplessness. We knew all too well what was in store for young Skywalker. He would succumb to fear, hate, anger, and finally suffering, ultimately leading him to the dark side and adopting the alias of Darth Vader. But regardless of how you watched this play out, it was a traumatic experience, not just for Anakin, but for the viewer. Either this was like watching your shining hero unexpectedly fall from grace, or it was akin to watching a train wreck play out before your eyes. Fans wondered what might trigger Anakin into taking his final step on the road to the dark side. When we saw SHMI near death after being bound and tortured by the Sand People, we knew this was the moment. Number 5. Anakin underestimating the high ground. Despite the criticism thrown at the prequels, they still had many redeemable features, not least Ewan McGregor in the role of Obi-Wan Kenobi. McGregor adopted the cadence and nuances of Alec Guinness just enough to make fans appreciate the effort while still making the character his own. Although this was the story of Anakin, we sympathise with Obi-Wan just as much, if not more. He watched his child pupil become the greatest Jedi in the galaxy before rapidly descending into darkness. It was McGregor's acting chops and a rare bit of good dialogue that made his showdown with Anakin so impactful. Watching the duel in Revenge of the Sith was equal parts exhilarating and heartbreaking. The lightsaber battle was one of the best put to screen, but it signified the end of the Jedi Order. We watched as Obi-Wan maimed his old friend, even as he espoused his love for him. Kenobi's anguish at watching his brother consumed by hatred and flame was almost too much to witness. Number 4. Order 66. By the time of the Clone Wars, the Jedi Order was rampant with hypocrisy and narrow-minded conservatism. Even so, seeing them systematically executed during Order 66 was a tough pill to swallow. In the days of the Empire, the Jedi had drifted into myth and legend, and the original trilogy only hinted at their previous power and prowess. With the prequels, we got to see them at the height of their pomp. We knew that ultimately these films were leading to the downfall of the Republic and the rise of the Empire. For that to happen, it was inevitable that the Jedi would come to a tragic end. When the moment finally came though, no amount of foreknowledge could have prepared us. Watching Jedi Masters with names that I can't pronounce like Ki-Adi-Mundi, Ayla Secura and Plo Koon gunned down by the very clones they had led into battle was a kick to the stomach. What's more, we saw the execution of Padawans and younglings as a legion of clones enveloped the Jedi Temple. Number 3. The death of Qui-GON Jinn. Qui-GON Jinn was rare in that he was one of the few true Jedi in the entire Star Wars saga. He had an unorthodox way of doing things, often disagreeing with the Jedi Council and following his own instincts. He was aware that their dogmatic approach was causing many to lose a true connection with the Force. He was humble, confident, without arrogance, and wise enough to see Anakin as the chosen one. Liam Neeson portrayed him as a protective and caring parental figure to both Obi-Wan and Anakin. He was an instant fan favourite, but of course he got killed off. Although The Phantom Menace had its issues, the death of Qui-GON was one of the most emotional scenes in the entire saga. This was a moment that shaped the young Obi-Wan's future. The dying wish of his master was for Anakin to be trained, a promise Obi-Wan tried to keep due to his devotion to Qui-GON, but felt haunted by when Anakin turned to evil. This death no doubt had a marked effect on the young Anakin Skywalker also. He'd already gone through the trauma of leaving his mother to her enslavement, and now his only other parental figure was dead. Number 2. The Youngling Massacre. By the time Episode 3 came to a close, it was clear there was no hope of saving Anakin Skywalker from his fate. Up until this point, his past misdeeds could at least be explained. His slaughter of the Tusken Raiders was a reaction to the torture and death of his mother. Even relieving Mace Windu of his hand and causing his death was out of yearning to save Padme, and it was clear he regretted the move. When it came to killing helpless younglings, however, there was no longer any human emotion driving Anakin's actions. He was merely following the will of the dark side. They were helpless children who asked for protection, and for a brief moment it looked as though he might help them escape, until his lightsaber ignited. They were doomed to death, and Anakin was doomed to darkness. By this point, we'd already watched the clones gun down their Jedi commanders, Mace Windu had been brutally killed, and Anakin had sworn allegiance to Palpatine. How could it get worse? Child massacre. Number 1. Luke drinking green milk. With all the atrocities committed by the Empire and the Sith, including the killing of innocent children and the destructions of entire planets, nothing was as traumatic as seeing the one-time hope for the galaxy milk an alien sea cow and chug down on its bodily fluids. It's fair to say the final trilogy did the dirty when it came to Luke's character arc. Once the most loved figure of the movies, he became a bitter old man who resembled little of the character we once knew. What Rian Johnson did to Luke was as egregious as what David Benioff and D.B. Weiss did to the entire Game of Thrones cast. The notion of subverting expectations was taken for a ride with this one. Seeing this character destroyed will leave a mark on long-time Star Wars fans for years to come, and the true severity of such trauma has not yet been fully realised. Luke's unsatisfactory death aside though, this scene alone would have been troubling regardless of how the story played out. Everyone from Rey to the audience and even Mark Hamill himself was blindsided and confused by this. We know Luke loved his blue milk back on his homeworld of Tatooine, but this just seemed perverse. What did you think of this list? Let us know in the comments below which Star Wars moment made you babble like a child the most. I've been Cy for What Culture, and have a good week.